I felt like there was something strange going on in my house long before I had proof, long before fear had a name, and long before I was ready to admit it to myself. At first it was only small things, things so ordinary that anyone else would have ignored them. A chair that wasn't where I remembered leaving it. A door that felt heavier to open, as if it had been closed with intention rather than habit. The house was quiet, but not the comforting kind of quiet. It was the kind that presses against your ears, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, I had lived in this house for more than 20 years. Every creak, every shadow, every odd noise should have felt familiar. But they didn't anymore. Something had shifted, and I could feel it in my bones. I lived alone, or at least I thought I did. After my husband passed away, the house had become my refuge and my prison at the same time. I filled the days with routines, morning coffee by the window, afternoon walks around the block, evenings spent with old TV shows playing softly in the background. Routine was how I survived loneliness. That's why it unsettled me so deeply when my routines started breaking on their own. One morning I found the back door unlocked. I was certain I had locked it the night before. I stood there staring at the handle, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself I had simply forgotten. Age does that, I thought. Memory slips. Don't panic. But panic had already taken hold, curling tightly in my chest. The feeling followed me through the house like a shadow. When I cooked, I felt watched. When I showered, I rushed, as if someone might hear the water running and know exactly where I was. At night, sleep came in fragments. I would wake suddenly, convinced I'd heard footsteps, only to find the hallway empty. Still, the air felt disturbed, like someone had passed through moments before. I didn't tell anyone. Not my neighbors. Not my sister. I didn't want to sound foolish or fragile. People are quick to dismiss fear when it doesn't come with visible proof. The first moment that truly frightened me came on a quiet afternoon. I returned home from the grocery store and noticed the living room light was on. I clearly remembered turning it off before leaving. I stood frozen at the doorway, bags cutting into my fingers, listening. Nothing. Just silence. Slowly I stepped inside. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but pride kept my feet moving forward. I checked every room. Closets. Bathroom. Bedroom. Nothing was out of place. No sign of anyone else. And yet, the feeling remained thick and undeniable. I began noticing patterns. Things only changed when I left the house. Never while I was inside. Almost as if someone knew my schedule better than I did. That thought chilled me more than anything else. I started keeping mental notes. What time I left. What doors I locked. What lights were off. And still, something always felt wrong when I came back. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses settle. Locks fail. Minds wander. But deep down I knew this wasn't coincidence. One evening, while folding laundry in the bedroom, I noticed something that made my hands go cold. The closet door was slightly open. I never leave it open. Ever. My heart raced as I stared at the dark gap, half expecting it to widen on its own. I reached for the door and swung it open. Empty. Just clothes. Just boxes. Just silence. I laughed nervously, trying to shake the fear, but my reflection in the mirror betrayed me. I looked scared. Older. Smaller somehow. That night, I sat on my bed and admitted something I had been avoiding for weeks. I was afraid of my own home. The place that was supposed to protect me no longer felt safe. I considered calling someone, anyone, but something held me back. A quiet voice inside warned me not to. Not yet. As if the truth, once spoken, would change everything. And I wasn't ready for that. What I didn't know then was that the strange feeling was only the beginning. The house wasn't just hiding secrets. It was preparing to reveal them. And when it did, I would realize that fear is not the worst thing that can live with you. Trust breaking is far more dangerous. By the next morning, I was exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. Fear has a way of draining you quietly, stealing energy before you even realize it's gone. I woke up with the same heavy feeling pressing against my chest, as if the house itself was watching me wake. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, soft and warm, but it did nothing to ease my nerves. I moved carefully, listening with every step, noticing every sound. The refrigerator hum felt louder than usual. The floorboards groaned like complaints rather than familiar noises. I told myself I would be braver today. I would stop letting my imagination control me. But courage is fragile when you're alone. I decided to test the house, though I didn't think of it that way at the time. I left intentionally, locking every door slowly, deliberately, double-checking each one. I even took photos of the locks with my phone, feeling slightly ridiculous but desperate for reassurance. I went to the library and stayed longer than usual, sitting among people just to feel normal again. When I finally returned home, my heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The locks were still intact. The doors were closed. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Inside, the air felt different, stale, as if it had been disturbed. I noticed the smell first. Not strong, not obvious, but unfamiliar. Something like cologne mixed with dust. I don't wear perfume. I never have. I stood still in the entryway, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Old houses collect smells, I thought. But the smell lingered as I moved deeper inside, growing stronger near the hallway. That's when I noticed the picture frame on the wall. It was crooked. A small detail, almost laughable. But I knew that frame. I had hung it myself, straightened it 100 times over the years. Someone had touched it. My hands trembled as I straightened the frame, anger beginning to replace fear. Anger can feel like strength when you're scared. I walked through the house, no longer careful, no longer quiet. "Hello." I called out, my voice louder than I felt. No answer. Just silence responding in kind. I checked the bedroom again. The bathroom. The kitchen. Everything looked normal, too normal. That was what bothered me most. If someone had been there, they were careful, methodical, respectful of the space in a way that felt deeply unsettling. That night, I didn't sleep in my bedroom. I stayed on the couch with the TV on low volume, the glow flickering against the walls. I held my phone tightly, my finger hovering over my sister's number. Every time the house made a sound, I jumped. At some point, exhaustion won. I drifted into shallow sleep, never fully unconscious, never fully awake. Then it happened. A sound not imagined this time. A soft thud from the back of the house. My eyes snapped open. I held my breath, listening. Another sound followed. Slow, careful, footsteps. My body went cold. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I lay there frozen, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain whoever was there could hear it. The footsteps stopped. Silence returned, thicker than before. I waited, counting seconds that stretched into minutes. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Fear does that, it negotiates with reality when the truth feels unbearable. In the morning, I searched the house again, this time with a sense of dread I could no longer ignore. That's when I found it. The back window slightly ajar. Just enough to let someone slip through. Just enough to explain everything. My knees buckled and I had to sit down. Someone had been inside my home. Not once. Not by accident. Repeatedly. Carefully. Quietly. I finally called my sister. My voice cracked as I told her everything, from the unlocked doors to the footsteps in the night. She wanted me to leave immediately, to come stay with her. I almost agreed. But something stopped me. A stubborn part of me refused to run. This was my house. My memories lived here. My life was built within these walls. If someone thought they could take that from me without consequence, they were wrong. What I didn't realize then was that whoever had been entering my home wasn't just trespassing. They were watching, learning, waiting. And soon I would discover that the danger wasn't a stranger after all, but someone I already knew. After discovering the open window, something inside me shifted permanently. Fear was no longer loud or panicked. It became quiet, calculating, and constant. I didn't call the police that day. Not because I didn't believe I should, but because I couldn't explain what was happening without sounding unsure of myself. There were no stolen items, no broken locks, no obvious damage. Only the unsettling certainty that I was no longer alone in a place that had always been my refuge. I spent the rest of the day cleaning obsessively, wiping surfaces that were already clean, rearranging objects as if reclaiming control through small acts of order. Yet every time I turned my back, I felt watched, as if someone stood just outside my line of sight, studying my movements, memorizing my routines. That night, I locked myself into the bedroom and pushed a chair under the doorknob, feeling foolish and desperate at the same time. I barely slept, my mind replaying every odd interaction from the past few weeks. The delivery man who lingered too long at the door. The neighbor who always seemed to know when I came and went. The repairman who asked unnecessary questions about my schedule. Each memory resurfaced with new weight, suspicion attaching itself to faces that once seemed harmless. By morning, exhaustion had stripped away my ability to pretend. I needed answers even if they frightened me more than ignorance. I decided to install a small camera system. Nothing dramatic, just a few discrete devices I could monitor from my phone. The man at the electronics store assured me it was simple, common, and affordable. He spoke kindly, unaware that his casual tone clashed violently with the storm raging inside me. That afternoon I set up the cameras myself, my hands shaking slightly as I adjusted the angles. One facing the back window, one covering the hallway, one in the living room. Watching those black lenses stare back at me made my stomach twist, but it also brought a strange sense of relief. If someone was entering my home, I would finally see them. For 2 days, nothing happened. I began to question myself again, wondering if fear had exaggerated harmless details. Maybe the window hadn't been fully closed. Maybe the smell had come from outside. Maybe the footsteps were just the house settling. On the third night, I almost turned the system off. That's when my phone vibrated. Emotion alert. My heart slammed against my ribs as I unlocked the screen. The timestamp glowed back at me, 2:17 a.m. My fingers felt numb as I opened the video feed. At first, all I saw was darkness. Then a shape moved slowly into frame. Person. Inside my house. They moved with ease, without hesitation, like someone familiar with the space. They didn't rush. They didn't fumble. They walked straight down the hallway, pausing briefly near the living room, as if listening. I held my breath, watching in horror as they turned slightly toward the camera. The image was grainy, but the posture was unmistakable. Calm. Confident. Not afraid of being caught. That was when I realized something far more terrifying than a break-in. This person didn't believe they were doing anything wrong. The figure moved toward the kitchen, and for a moment, I thought they might look directly into the camera. Instead, they reached for the refrigerator, opened it, and stood there as if considering their options. The normality of the act made me feel sick. This wasn't theft. This wasn't desperation. This was entitlement. Someone had decided my home was theirs to enter whenever they pleased. The feed cut out as the motion sensor timed out, leaving me staring at my reflection on the dark screen. My own face pale and unrecognizable. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the bedroom with the door locked, clutching my phone, replaying the footage over and over. By morning, fear had transformed into something sharper, determination. I copied the video, backed it up, and finally called the police. When the officer arrived, his expression shifted from polite skepticism to concern as he watched the footage. He asked me questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. Did I know anyone with a key? Had I ever lent one out? Had I recently changed my locks? That last question hit me hard. No, I hadn't. Not in years. As the officer left, promising to follow up, I stood alone in the doorway, staring at the quiet street outside. The danger no longer felt abstract. It had a presence, a pattern, a purpose. And deep down, I already knew the truth I wasn't ready to admit yet, that this wasn't a random intruder, and it wasn't going to end quietly. Whoever was coming into my house wasn't finished. They were getting comfortable, and soon they wouldn't bother hiding at all. After the police visit, the house felt different, not safer, just quieter in a way that pressed on my ears. Every sound stood out too clearly. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, even my own breathing when I moved from room to room. I followed the officer's advice and changed all the locks that same day, watching the locksmith work while explaining the situation in fragments, as if saying it all out loud might make it more real than I could handle. When he handed me the new keys, they felt heavier than metal, like symbols of a boundary I had been naive to protect before. Still, a question kept circling my mind, refusing to settle. How long had this been happening before I noticed? Days? Weeks? Longer? That evening, I called my daughter and tried to keep my voice calm as I told her someone had been entering the house. She reacted the way children often do when fear collides with distance, concern mixed with disbelief. She suggested stress, exhaustion, maybe even loneliness playing tricks on my mind. I didn't blame her. If I hadn't seen the footage myself, I might have doubted it too. I didn't push. I didn't tell her about the way the intruder moved like they belonged there. Some things felt too fragile to share yet. The next few days passed without incident, and slowly my nerves began to loosen. I still checked the camera feeds obsessively, but each empty frame chipped away at the sharp edge of panic. I began sleeping more than an hour at a time. I cooked again, watered my plants, even laughed once at a silly television show, surprised at how normal everything looked on the surface. That was the most dangerous part, the return of routine, because routine breeds trust, and trust had already failed me once. It was on the 5th night after changing the locks that I heard it, the faint, unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal at the back door. I froze mid-step, my heart leaping into my throat. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I listened. The sound stopped, followed by a pause so long it felt intentional, as if whoever was outside was listening too, waiting to see if I'd react. Then came a soft knock. Not aggressive. Not hurried. Almost polite. My skin crawled. This wasn't someone trying to sneak in anymore. This was someone testing how much control they still had. I backed away slowly and locked myself in the bedroom again, my hands trembling as I pulled up the camera feed. The back door camera showed a figure standing just out of full view, close enough that only part of their shoulder appeared on screen. They knew exactly where the camera was. That realization hit harder than the knock itself. They weren't guessing. They were familiar with my defenses, adapting to changes as they happened. When my phone buzzed with another motion alert, this time from the hallway camera, I nearly dropped it. Impossible. I was locked inside. I stared at the screen in disbelief as the hallway light flicked on, illuminating an empty space. No person. No movement. Just light. That was when the truth finally settled into my bones. This wasn't just about access. It was psychological. Someone was trying to make me doubt my senses, my safety, my sanity. I called the police again, my voice breaking as I explained what was happening in real time. By the time they arrived, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No signs of forced entry. No one outside. Just me, shaking in my bedroom, surrounded by locked doors and unanswered questions. The officers were patient but cautious. They suggested the possibility of someone who had once had legitimate access, an old acquaintance, a former worker, someone who knew the house well. As they spoke, memories surfaced I had buried without realizing it. The contractor who helped after my husband passed. The neighbor who insisted on helping with small repairs. The casual offers that once felt kind now felt invasive in hindsight. I gave the names I could remember, watching their pens move across notepads, hoping something would connect. After they left, I sat alone at the dining table until dawn, staring at the spot where my husband used to sit. Grief crept in quietly, weaving itself into fear until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. This house held decades of my life. Birthdays, arguments, quiet mornings, shared meals. And now, someone was trying to rewrite what it meant to me, turning comfort into vulnerability. By morning, I made a decision I never thought I would. I packed a small bag and went to stay with a friend across town, telling myself it was temporary, just until things settled. But as I locked the door behind me, I knew this wasn't over. Because whoever had been coming into my house wasn't just after space or objects. They wanted presence, control. And the fact that they were willing to announce themselves now meant one thing. I had disrupted their sense of ownership. And people don't let go of what they believe is already theirs without a fight. Staying at my friend's house was supposed to make me feel safe, but safety, I learned, is not just about locked doors and shared walls. It's about peace of mind, and mine was shattered. Even in her guest room, surrounded by unfamiliar furniture and the soft ticking of a different clock, I slept lightly, waking at every small sound. My phone stayed clutched in my hand like a lifeline, the camera app installed but useless here. A reminder that my own home was still vulnerable without me there to watch it. During the day, I tried to act normal, helping with dishes, chatting over coffee, thanking her repeatedly for letting me stay. But inside, my thoughts kept circling the same terrifying question. If someone had been entering my house before, what stopped them from following me now? 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a notification from the security company. At first, I thought it was a glitch motion detected in the living room. My heart pounded as I opened the live feed, expecting darkness or perhaps a stray shadow. Instead, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The living room light was on again. Not flickering. Fully on. and the curtains were drawn, even though I distinctly remembered leaving them open when I left. The house looked occupied, staged, as if someone wanted it to appear alive. I called the police immediately, my voice steadier than I felt, and gave them permission to enter the house on my behalf. When they arrived, they found no one inside. No forced entry. No broken windows. But something had changed. Furniture had been subtly rearranged. Nothing dramatic, just enough to feel intentional. A chair angled differently. A framed photo moved from the shelf to the table. And worst of all, my bedroom door was open. I had closed it before leaving. That detail clung to me like a bruise. The officer on the phone tried to reassure me, said this kind of thing was meant to intimidate, to provoke fear rather than cause harm. But fear was exactly what was working. Whoever this was knew restraint. And restraint is often more frightening than violence. That night I couldn't take it anymore. I sat my friend down and told her everything, the footage, the knocks, the lights turning on by themselves, the sense that someone was playing a long, deliberate game. Her expression shifted from concern to alarm, and for the first time, I felt validated instead of doubted. She insisted I stay as long as needed, even offered to sleep with her door open so I wouldn't feel alone. I agreed, grateful but still uneasy, because validation doesn't stop someone who believes they own you. The next morning, I received a message that changed everything. It wasn't a text. It was an email, sent from an address I didn't recognize, with no subject line. The message was short, almost casual. You shouldn't have left. The house feels empty without you. I stared at the screen, my hands going cold. There was no threat. No demand. Just certainty. Whoever sent it knew I was gone. Knew when I left. And worse, felt entitled enough to comment on it. I forwarded the email to the police immediately, my chest tight as I waited for their response. They took it seriously this time. A detective was assigned to the case, someone calm, methodical, who asked questions that forced me to revisit uncomfortable memories. Who had keys in the past? Who knew my routines? Who had reason to feel connected to my home beyond normal boundaries? As we spoke, a name surfaced again and again, one I had tried not to dwell on. The neighbor who always seemed a little too invested in my life after my husband passed. He had offered help often. Fixed a fence. Checked on me when my lights were on late. Harmless, I had thought. Kind. But kindness, when uninvited and persistent, can curdle into something else. The detective didn't jump to conclusions, but he noted everything. The timeline. The access. The familiarity with the house. He asked if I would be willing to return home under surveillance. Cameras monitored more closely, patrols increased. The idea terrified me, but something inside me hardened at the thought of staying away forever. That house was my life. I refused to be pushed out by someone else's obsession. I agreed, even though my voice shook when I said it. When I returned home 2 days later, escorted by an officer, the house felt colder, like it resented my absence. I walked through each room slowly, reclaiming space with every step. I spoke out loud, announcing myself, reminding whoever might be listening that I was not gone, not silent, not afraid enough to disappear. The officer stayed until nightfall, then left, promising increased patrols. As darkness settled in, I sat in my living room with all the lights on, watching the camera feeds like a sentinel. That was when the front porch camera alerted me again. A familiar figure stood at the edge of the frame, not trying to hide this time. He didn't knock. He didn't smile. He just stood there staring at the door, as if waiting for me to acknowledge him. And in that moment, I understood the truth fully. This wasn't about breaking in anymore. It was about being seen. And the game had entered a far more dangerous stage. I didn't open the door. I didn't even move at first. I just sat there, staring at the porch camera feed on my phone, watching him stand unnaturally still, as if time itself had paused around him. The streetlight cast long shadows across his face, carving it into something unfamiliar, something harder. This was not the friendly neighbor who once carried groceries for me or waved from across the lawn. This was someone who believed he belonged here. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure he could hear it through the walls. After nearly a minute, he finally lifted his hand. Not to knock, but to rest it flat against the door. The intimacy of the gesture made my skin crawl. It felt like a violation far deeper than breaking in. He stayed like that for several seconds, then slowly stepped back, turned and walked away without a word. I called the detective immediately. He told me I'd done the right thing by not engaging and asked me to save the footage. His voice was calm, but I could hear the shift in tone. The case had crossed an invisible line. This wasn't circumstantial anymore. This was deliberate contact. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded amplified. Every gust of wind felt intentional. I kept the lights on until dawn, sitting in the living room with my coat draped over my shoulders, as if ready to run at a moment's notice. Fear does strange things. It sharpens your senses while exhausting your soul. The next day, the police paid him a visit. They didn't arrest him. Not yet. They asked questions, checked his side of the story, reminded him firmly that he was not to come near my home again. When the detective called to update me, he said the neighbor seemed cooperative, even confused, claiming he'd only stopped by to check on me, after noticing my lights had been off for days. The explanation sounded almost reasonable on the surface, and that terrified me more than outright hostility would have. Reasonable stories are harder to disprove. They slip through cracks. They make doubt grow where certainty should live. For a brief moment things went quiet. No alerts. No lights turning on by themselves. No strange emails. I allowed myself to breathe again, to believe that maybe the warning had been enough. I went grocery shopping, walked my usual route, even laughed with the cashier about something trivial. Life tried to return to its shape, but unease lingered, like a bruise that hurt only when pressed. I knew better than to trust the silence. 3 nights later, I found something waiting for me in my mailbox. It wasn't threatening at first glance. Just an envelope. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with my handwriting on it, or at least a frightening imitation. It listed mundane things. Milk. Bread. Batteries. The same grocery list I'd written weeks earlier and tossed into the trash. My knees nearly gave out as I stood there, the paper trembling in my hands. He hadn't just been watching my house. He'd been watching me. That was the moment anger finally broke through the fear. Not explosive anger, but something colder, steadier. A resolve. I was done being reactive, done waiting for the next move. I contacted the detective again, brought the letter to the station, and insisted on filing a formal complaint. This time there was no minimizing it. Possession of personal discarded items crossed into obsession. A restraining order was issued that same day. Legal language on paper felt thin compared to the reality of what I was facing, but it was a line drawn nonetheless. Serving the order changed something. Not in him, but in me. I stopped shrinking inside my own life. I stopped apologizing for being cautious. I reinforced my boundaries with steel. Cameras were upgraded. Locks replaced. Motion lights installed everywhere. Friends checked in daily. I even told my children everything. Hearing the fury in their voices and realizing I hadn't been alone at all. I'd just been quiet. The first time I saw him after the order, it was accidental. We crossed paths at the edge of the street, far enough to be legal, close enough to be intentional. He didn't smile this time. He looked at me with something like betrayal, as if I'd broken an unspoken agreement he believed we shared. That look confirmed everything. This had never been about kindness. It had been about control. As I walked past him, I didn't lower my eyes. My hands shook, but I kept my head high. Fear no longer owned me the way it once had. It still existed, yes, but now it walked beside courage instead of ahead of it. And as I reached my door, locking it firmly behind me, I understood something deeply important. The most dangerous moment in stories like this isn't when you realize you're being watched. It's when the watcher realizes you're no longer afraid to be seen fighting back. After that encounter on the street, something inside me shifted permanently. Fear didn't vanish, but it stopped dictating my every thought. Instead, it sharpened my awareness. I began noticing patterns I might have dismissed before. The way his curtains moved when I stepped outside. The car that slowed near my driveway before continuing down the block. The unfamiliar footsteps I sometimes heard late at night that stopped just before my porch. Each incident on its own could have been coincidence. But together they formed a rhythm. A quiet persistence that refused to fade. The restraining order created distance, not disappearance. It made him careful, not gone. I started documenting everything with an almost obsessive discipline. Dates, times, screenshots, recordings, my life became a logbook. It was exhausting, but it gave me control. Control over a situation that once felt chaotic and invasive. The detective told me this was often the longest stage in cases like mine, the waiting game where the aggressor tests boundaries without crossing them too obviously. "He's trying to see what he can get away with," he said. Those words echoed in my head constantly. I refused to let the answer be anything. One evening while reviewing footage, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The camera caught him standing at the edge of his yard, phone held up, pointed directly toward my house. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't pretending. He wanted to be noticed. That realization chilled me more than secrecy ever could. People who want to be seen believe they're untouchable. I forwarded the clip immediately. This time the response was faster. An officer was sent to speak with him again, and I was told to prepare for the possibility that this would escalate before it ended. Knowing that didn't make me feel safer, but it made me ready. That same week, I made a decision I should have made earlier. I stopped isolating myself. I invited my sister to stay over. I told my closest friends the full truth, without minimizing, without embarrassment. Saying the words out loud, "I'm scared in my own home," was harder than I expected. But the relief that followed was real. Fear thrives in silence. Once spoken, it loses some of its power. My house filled with noise again. Conversations, footsteps, life. And for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. But obsession doesn't retreat quietly. It reacts to loss of access like a wound. 2 days later, the escalation came. Not at my door, not in the yard, but online. Anonymous accounts began messaging me. Some were subtle, referencing things only I would recognize. Others were cruel, accusatory, claiming I was paranoid, dramatic, unstable. The tone was designed to confuse, to provoke doubt. I knew better. This wasn't random harassment. It was retaliation. A last attempt to regain psychological ground. Instead of responding, I handed everything over to the authorities. Each message became evidence. Each attempt to unsettle me strengthened the case against him. The detective told me quietly that the situation was nearing a breaking point, that obsession rarely survives sustained resistance. It either collapses or explodes. That night, I sat in my living room, lights dimmed, heart steady in a way I hadn't felt in months, and prepared myself for either outcome. The explosion came sooner than expected. Just after midnight, the motion sensor alerted me again. This time there was no stillness, no hesitation. He stormed into the frame, shouting words the microphone barely caught, gesturing wildly at the door, accusing me of ruining his life. I didn't watch for long. Called 911 immediately. By the time officers arrived, he was still there, pacing, unraveling. The restraint he'd practiced was gone. In its place was desperation. Watching him being taken away felt surreal. Not triumphant. Not relieving in the way movies suggest. It was quiet. Heavy. I realized then that people like him don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as wronged, entitled, misunderstood. That belief is what makes them dangerous. But belief doesn't outweigh law, evidence, and persistence. This time there were consequences. In the days that followed, I replayed everything in my mind, searching for signs I'd missed, moments I could have acted sooner. Guilt crept in as it often does, but I refused to let it stay. I had trusted my instincts when it mattered. I had spoken up. I had protected myself. That mattered more than perfect timing. Standing in my kitchen one morning, sunlight pouring in through the window, I realized something simple and profound. My house felt like mine again. Not because the danger was completely gone, but because I had reclaimed my sense of agency. Fear no longer dictated my movements. Silence no longer protected someone else at my expense. What I didn't know then was that the final chapter of this story wasn't about him at all. It was about what came next. How survival reshapes you. How vigilance turns into wisdom. And how the quiet after chaos teaches you who you truly are. In the weeks after everything finally settled, life didn't rush back to normal the way people expect it to. There was no sudden relief, no dramatic exhale where all the fear disappeared at once. Instead, calm returned slowly, cautiously, like an animal testing whether it was safe to come out of hiding. I found myself listening differently to the silence in my house, no longer bracing for it, but learning it again. The walls felt steadier. The air felt lighter. And yet I had changed. That was unavoidable. Surviving something like this doesn't just end when the threat is removed. It rewires you. I became more aware of my instincts, more respectful of that quiet inner voice I had once brushed aside as overthinking. I realized how often we're taught to ignore discomfort to keep peace, how many times we explain away behavior that unsettles us because it's easier than confronting it. I promised myself I would never do that again. I attended the hearings with a calm I didn't expect. Sitting there, listening to timelines and terminology, I saw the situation stripped of emotion, reduced to facts and patterns. It was validating in a strange way. Everything I had felt, every unease, every moment of fear, was now visible on paper, undeniable. When it was over, I walked out of the building and stood in the sunlight for a long time, letting the weight lift in small increments. Justice, I learned, doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like quiet acknowledgement. Yes, this happened, and no, you weren't wrong to be afraid. At home, I began reclaiming the spaces that had once felt compromised. I rearranged furniture, repainted the front door, planted new flowers along the walkway. These were small acts, but they mattered. They were declarations. This is my space. This is my life. Friends came over again. Laughter filled rooms that had once echoed with tension, and slowly, my home stopped feeling like a place I defended and started feeling like a place I lived in. Safety returned not as an assumption, but as something earned and maintained. The experience also reshaped how I saw strength. I used to think strength meant endurance, keeping your head down, getting through things quietly, not making waves. Now I know strength is often loud in its own quiet way. It's documentation. It's boundaries. It's refusing to explain your fear to people who benefit from you having none. It's asking for help without apology. I stopped feeling embarrassed about what happened to me and started understanding the power of telling the story. Silence protects the wrong people. Speaking protects you. Occasionally, fear still visits. A shadow that lingers too long, a sound outside late at night, a memory triggered by something ordinary. But fear no longer controls me. It informs me. It reminds me to stay aware without staying small. There's a difference, and learning it changed everything. What stays with me most is this. Danger didn't announce itself loudly at the beginning. It arrived politely, subtly, wrapped in familiarity. That's the truth people don't talk about enough. Harm doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like someone standing too close, knowing too much, feeling entitled to your attention. Trust your discomfort. It's not rudeness. It's survival. Today, when I sit in my living room and watch the light shift across the floor, I feel something deeper than relief. I feel ownership of my space, of my story, of my voice. What happened to me didn't break me, it sharpened me. And if there's one reason I share this now, it's not to relive fear, but to remind someone listening that if something feels wrong, it probably is. You don't owe silence to anyone at the cost of your safety. You don't owe access to people who make you uneasy, and you don't need permission to protect yourself. This wasn't just a story about being watched. It was a story about waking up, about choosing awareness over denial, about learning that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of boundaries. And in the end, that understanding gave me something far more valuable than comfort. It gave me my life back.